So the third book that you just wrote, which, by the way, congratulations on writing a third book, Nourished, I have it right here, Nourished, Connection, Food, and Caring for Our Kids and Everyone Else We Love. Such an important topic. And I'm just curious, how were you inspired to write a third book?
Well, I never thought I'd be writing about food and attachment together. That came about because my daughter was a picky eater, one of my daughters, my younger ones. And that was due, actually, I didn't realize at the time, just really huge sensitivity in her chemical sensing system. So, smell, touch, taste, everything. And my elder daughter was not a picky eater. And so I went to my supervisor. I was working with families around attachment issues and learning about this, my postdoc supervisor, Gordon Neufeld, and said, what am I supposed to do about this? And he didn't answer the question for a reason. And
didn't he say to you something about adding wine?
She only wanted to eat cheese and bread. And he said, well, if you just throw in some wine, you have the perfect meal. And I thought, you're like a world-leading attachment developmental expert, and this is the best you can give me. So I was really frustrated, but I knew he was trying to help me understand something that I had missed. And so the book actually is a journey into understanding what it was. I don't think he ever anticipated I would write a book to solve this question. And I did find some really helpful things along the way, like Ellen Satter's division of responsibility, which was wonderful. But I wanted to delve a little bit deeper into what is this connection that has been lost, that somehow we're focusing on just the picky eating, and that we've lost somehow an understanding of how we become eaters, how relationship is part of that, how this natural development unfolds, and what is our job as a parent, and what do we do when we get stuck, and oh my goodness, the kind of relationship problems we can create when we get stuck, which is what I was doing with my daughter. So that's how the book came about.
A lot of us pediatricians use the line, some kids live to eat and some kids eat to live. So it sounds like you had one of each.
I do have one of each, and they taught me something completely different and was baffling. And I think that's true for a lot of families. They think, how is it that I can be the same parent and yet have such different responses in my kids? Then we realize it's not all about us.
This is true. And I think about eating a lot because obviously it's something that we have to do. And why not make it fun? Why not make it enjoyable? But it ends up being, quite frankly, such a stressful experience for so many parents and caregivers.
Yeah, it really is. And there's so many reasons for that. But yes, the number of challenges, and especially as a pediatrician, I mean, the issues around food and picky eating and sensitivities, certainly where I see it in my counseling practice is where food problems have created relational ones, and where relational problems are creating food ones. They're so intertwined. And some of the problems have nothing to do with what's happening in the home. Sometimes it's what's happening outside the home for a child as well. So yeah, there's so many different ways that challenges can show up.
Yes, I will tell you, we see families for their yearly physicals. And when I see 2-year-olds, I almost anticipate when I ask parents how things are going at home, I expect that they're going to tell me that they're frustrated because their child is such a picky eater. And what I loved about your book is that you delved into the psychology about why that happens.
Yes.
And one thing that you made me think about that I hadn't really thought about before was that why evolutionarily would this happen? I mean, it must happen for a reason, right? Maybe it's not such a bad thing.
No, it's not at all. I mean, I was really, Paul Rosen coined the term omnivore's dilemma, basically noting that we could, eat anything, essentially almost anything. And Michael Pollan picked up on that. So it's a curious question, why are humans able to eat such a broad variety of foods? And that what you see is as a child gets older, it becomes more narrow and more narrow. Well, how does it narrow? It narrows around relationship. We want to eat like, talk like, walk like, adopt the same values as the people that we're attached to. Why? Because that serves survival. And so, of course, our palate in being an omnivore would shape around the influences in our life. And that's how we have cuisine. That's how we have food culture. That's how we know our people. That's how we know the smells of home. What is home? What isn't home? Is that this attachment brain, this emotional system says, steer in this direction. This is your home. The other interesting thing is, it creates a sense of home and a place and people. And so we know that's where we go for our care. The other curious thing about a 2-year-old, or the most beautiful thing about a 2-year-old who's unfolding well, is you'll oftentimes hear, I do it myself, me do, I do.
Yes. How did you know that? That's what we say. I always say a 2-year-old's mantra is, help me, I do it myself.
I love this.
They need both parts to it. They need the help. They need the independence.
And you just see this shift where they go from being simply just fed to becoming an eater. Now just think about that shift. Like suddenly they want their toast cut in a certain way. Somehow they like this taste and not this taste. Somehow they want more autonomy to explore. Somehow they want to be, in control of what goes in their mouth and comes out of their body. And so it's an age of autonomy. So of course they start to have preferences, wants, and wishes. And the other thing is that what facilitates that is this incredible instinct called counterwill. So when they feel pushed, they push back. So when we say you must eat everything green, they hate everything green. The instincts and emotions that drive this developmentally make them less receptive to pushing, cajoling, coercing, bribing, threats, punishment, any behavioral forms of management backfire tremendously at this age. And of course, how do we try to feed our kids? Through behavioral measures,
Yes.
And so of course this backfires at this age. The one piece of interesting research that I just loved that I found was from Paul Rosen, where he studied why kids in Mexico at the age of 2 wouldn't eat any of the hot chilies. Like they were just so avoidant to it. And then by 5, suddenly they'd adopted eating all of these hot chilies and they loved it. And he said, what happened between 2 and 5? That they go from hating it to loving it. And he said, we don't know why, but it happens around the table where they watch other people eating it and enjoying it. And in these homes, there is no coercion. There's just a love for food. And so you see this age of 2 and this picky eating, we're in such a hurry. We're focusing on outcomes. If we focused on relationship and creating a context that is emotionally safe for eating, you actually see that developmentally kids want to be like us. And yet we're so busy pushing. So that in a nutshell are some of the key reasons anyway for picky eating.
No, and I think it's beautifully put, because it's true. I have families that are from different backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds, and I'm always impressed when certain kids are eating spices and they're eating spicy foods. And I think, how did this parent make this happen? What a beautiful thing to have a child that can eat such a variety of delicious foods. And I love how you point out that we're obviously doing something wrong when we're so focused on the outcomes in this country, and so many people end up having disordered eating of some kind. So it seems like what we're doing in our focus on getting our kids to eat and really pushing them, we're not getting the outcomes we want.
No, it's we seem to have more intuition around trying to get them to school in the morning or put them to bed. The more you push a child to go to sleep, you must sleep, I can't be near you, the more it backfires, the more alarmed they can get. The more you push them to hurry up, get to school, you'll be late, the more they slow down, they go boneless. And it's the same with food. The more you have to eat, the more it has to be this, the more focused and alarmed and coercive we are. Oh my goodness. 2 or 3-year-olds can smell it a mile away and they just back up.
We see it in toddlers, the counter will, but I actually think it's true for human nature. When you feel pushed to do something, a lot of times the spidey senses go up, you don't like how it feels, and you do the opposite, you resist.
Yeah, absolutely. We all have this instinct. And of course, what buttons get pushed in us when our kids don't eat? They don't obey, they don't follow our agenda, they don't want to eat the meals that we put on the table. If you're a working parent, you're like, oh my gosh, I just cooked this lettuce is $7. Like everything's going through our head and we're like, this kid isn't eating it. So what gets pushed in us? Our counter will, our resistance and opposition, which is what was happening to me. I kept pushing my daughter to eat. She kept resisting, and we kept going round and round and round. And before I knew it, we were starting to have a relationship problem, not a food problem anymore, a food problem and a relationship problem. So I'd lost the relational aspect that would help me steer her towards better eating.
And it makes sense, because eating food is not a once a week, a once a month activity. It's all the time. Yeah. So if you're constantly battling, it makes sense that it could eventually seep into your relationship.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm curious. Okay, so let's say a family's listening and they have a picky eater. They're experiencing challenges with their toddler. What advice would you give them to start off on a better foot?
Yeah. So there's 3 things to focus. Is number 1, focus on your relationship. So how are you gathering your child? How are you collecting them to bring them to the table? They might be lost in play. They might be doing something else. Preschoolers or young kids, even anybody really, can have one single mind focus, getting them off a screen. So how do you get in their face in a friendly way? get the connection first. Engage them in helping with dinner if that's possible. If not, it's okay. Just engage with them. Have a hello before there's a meal, and use relationship to bring them to the table. Make the context. The second thing is make the place that you eat, whatever that looks like for you, make it a place of connection. It's not a time to bring up challenges. It's a time to focus on play if you can, playing games, people taking turns. Good thing, bad thing about the day, not everybody has to talk. Focus on the enjoyment of the food. Like I would just often say to my husband, so what do you think of this? I tried a new recipe. What do you think? And we would just have a conversation, a natural conversation, not like, okay, everybody has to do this. It wasn't forced. It wasn't contrived. It was just the focus was on being together. That's the second thing. So make it emotionally safe to be there. Focus on relationship, make it emotionally safe. And number 3 is that to remember that we will eat like the people we are attached to. We will try the food that we are of the people who we are attached to. So to remember that we're introducing foods, that it's not just simply putting new food on the table. It's about seeing that the other people like it. So we're having repeated exposure to food, room to explore, room to play. But you could have lots of exposure, but if you're not connected to the people who are exposing you, it likely could backfire. So the exposure to new things is not to stop trying, to have some patience, to set the table as you see fit, to make room for people's different preferences. One study I read said that everybody in a household tends to eat the same food, but everybody will have a different preference, right? So some people are one way or the other. So we just make room for that in the context of exposing without pushing and enjoying the food. And if there's really big problems and you can't collect your child and you can't engage them, then try to find ways to get to their side outside of food, like play, go for an outing, do some hobbies together, try to figure out what's getting in the way of relationship before you try to bring them to the table. Like so much of what we do in terms of attachment happens outside of the table, outside of the place that we eat. And so, work on it that way as well.
What you're saying makes so much sense, because I'm thinking if a child learns that every time they sit at the table, there's an argument or a disagreement or criticism, who would want to sit there? If children get accustomed to the table being safe and a place of love and telling stories, inevitably they'll look forward to it.
Yeah, exactly. And toddlers, they jump around a little bit. They got a little bit of energy and they like to play. And so, of course, play will hold their attention. But, it's okay to tell a story. It's okay to have them on your lap. I think if we're a lot less rigid and
Yes.
also enjoyed this time, and that the family meal wasn't a prescription, but a celebration of whoever's there and whatever togetherness looks like for you. I think that would be a lot healthier. I think parents feel a lot of guilt. Well, I'm not having dinners every night. Well, actually, that's not necessarily in the best interest if you can't all get there and there's arguments. And the research only shows 3 times a week is really the key. I mean, not that we shouldn't shoot for more, but at least get to 3, and find ways to do that. But it could be a breakfast, it could be a lunch, it could be a picnic, it could be picking your kid up for a soccer, after school to go to soccer. This is about an invitation for dependence. I will take care of you, with food being the symbolic gesture in many ways. It has very practical implications, of course, too. But it's also a symbolic gesture of I will take care of you. So it doesn't just have to happen around a table. And you don't necessarily have to make the food. Obviously, it's ideal and lovely when you can, but the idea that everything has to be homemade and from scratch, and that we wouldn't lean on other people to help us feed our kids in the context of today's life is, it's a burden and it's unrealistic. So
you're making me feel better.
Yeah. Well, it's my life too.
You're making me feel better. Yeah, and one thing I want to touch upon is a lot of parents come to me and they're stressed that their child will somehow be nutritionally deficient. Mm-hmm. Maybe they won't grow as, up to their genetic potential. Maybe something will be wrong with them in their bodies. They won't be as healthy. Yeah. And I really try to reassure parents to think about the big picture, because it's very, very, very rare that I'll meet a child that's nutritionally deficient in some way. Even as picky as they may seem to the parent, as little as they may eat as it appears to the parent, kids end up thriving in the United States. That's the truth.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's a beautiful message too. And it's so important to hear, especially from our medical professionals, right? That we're really alarmed about things that we should have more pause for thought, right? And check things out, but have more pause there. I think what's beautiful in what you're saying is that nature has a way to help us thrive. And nature really wired us up this way. And so if we are worried about, and I've worked with lots of families where there's been eating challenges or allergies or whatever, what still is the answer? The answer through is having a connection, because you have to lead. The more challenges there are in food, the more you have to lead, and the more connection you need, the more receptivity you need in the child. So you have to really work at relationship so that the child follows you, wants to be like you, is receptive to what you have to offer, to the directions that you might give around an allergy, or want to be with you and feel safe with you around eating food if eating food is a scary thing. So relationship is always going to help us out here, to help our children eat healthy, to get the food that we want to get into them, perhaps, if they have some autonomy here too. So, but when relationship isn't there, it makes everything worse, and we can absolutely dig in some big food problems.